They say the hardest part of a funeral is the silence between the hymns, the moments when the organ stops and you're left alone with the weight of the mahogany box in front of you. But for me, the silence was a luxury I couldn't afford. My name is Booker King. I'm 72 years old, and for 45 of those years, Esther was the air in my lungs and the compass in my pocket. I spent 4 decades managing logistics in a warehouse, and before that, I carried a rifle through jungles that didn't want me there. I've learned to read a room, and I've learned to recognize the smell of a storm long before the first drop of rain hits the dirt. But as I sat in that front pew of St. Jude's Baptist Church, my knuckles white as I gripped my hickory cane, I realized the storm wasn't coming, it was already sitting right behind me. The air in the sanctuary was thick with the scent of lilies and old hymnals, but it was being choked out by something else. A cloud of expensive, cloying perfume that smelled like a department store explosion mixed with the stale, sour scent of a 3-day bender. I didn't have to turn around to know that my son, Terrence, and his wife, Tiffany, had finally decided to grace us with their presence. They weren't just 5 minutes late, they were 40 minutes late, making sure their entrance was loud enough to interrupt the choir's rendition of Precious Lord. The heavy oak doors had banged open with a lack of respect that felt like a physical slap to the back of my head. I heard the sharp, rhythmic clack of Tiffany's high heels against the stone floor, not a somber walk, but a runway strut. Terrence slid into the pew beside me, bringing a gust of heat and nervous energy. He didn't reach out to touch my shoulder. He didn't lean over to whisper that he was sorry. He just sat there, smelling of mints and desperation, and immediately pulled out his phone. The blue light of the screen illuminated his face in the dim church, highlighting the deep, dark bags under his eyes and the frantic twitch in his jaw. He was wearing a cream-colored suit that looked like it cost more than my first house, a sharp contrast to the sea of black and navy around him. It was a suit for a man who wanted to be seen, not a man who was mourning his mother. "Is it almost over?" I heard Tiffany whisper. She didn't care that the pastor was mid-prayer. I keep my hearing aids tuned high. People think I'm a deaf old man. But the truth is, I hear the things people think they're hiding. I heard the rustle of her silk dress, a garment so tight and short it felt like an insult to the sanctuary. "Shh," Terrence hissed back, but his thumbs never stopped moving across his phone screen. I caught a glimpse of it. It wasn't a condolence message. It was a sports betting app, the numbers flashing green and red like a neon sign of his failures. I looked back at the casket. Esther looked so small in there. She was a woman who had worked 30 years as the head housekeeper and personal assistant to Alistair Thorne, one of the wealthiest men in the country. She was the kind of woman who scrubbed floors until her hands bled just to make sure Terrence had the best of everything. She'd paid for his private schools, his college, and 3 failed business ventures that he'd flushed down the drain. And here he was, at her final homegoing, checking the spread on a Tuesday night basketball game. When the service finally ended and we moved to the fellowship hall for the repast, the tension didn't lift, it curdled. The church ladies had laid out a spread of everything Esther loved: fried chicken, collard greens, and the kind of macaroni and cheese that takes 3 hours to bake. It was comfort food, but Tiffany looked at the paper plates like they were contaminated with the plague. She stood against the wall, her huge black sunglasses still on, fanning herself with a funeral program. "I can't believe we're expected to eat this grease," she whispered to Terrence, loud enough for me to catch every syllable over the hum of the crowd. "It's hang in lea hai musao, Terrence. Who still serves this? It's low rent. And look at this room. Where did all her money go? You told me she was Alistair Thorne's right hand. You said she was managing things. If she was so important, why are we in a basement eating with plastic forks?" Terrence didn't look at her. He was shoveling a piece of cornbread into his mouth, his eyes darting around the room like he was looking for an exit or a creditor. "She spent it, Tiff," he muttered. "She spent it on those heart pills. $500 a month just to keep her ticker jumping. It was a waste." "Well," Tiffany said, and I heard the sharp, cruel edge of a laugh in her voice. "At least that's $500 a month back in our pockets now. It's a silver lining, right?" My heart stopped for a beat. Then it started again. A slow, heavy thrum of pure, unadulterated rage. My wife wasn't even in the ground yet, and they were calculating the savings on her death. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, but not from age. I had to grip my cane so hard I thought the hickory might snap. I wanted to stand up and roar. I wanted to remind them whose house they were living in and whose food they were complaining about. But I remained a soldier. I remained disciplined. I would not give them the satisfaction of a scene. The room began to clear. Neighbors patted my hand, offering, "Sorry for your loss, and she's in a better place." I nodded and smiled the way a man does when he's waiting for the enemy to show their hand. Finally, it was just the three of us. The silence of the empty hall was heavier than the music had been. Terrence walked over to me. He stood over my chair, blocking the light. He didn't look at me. He looked at the wall behind me. "Dad," he said, his voice flat and stripped of any fake sympathy. "We need to go by the house, now." "The house isn't going anywhere, Terrence," I said, my voice raspy. "I'm tired. I want to go home and sit in my chair." "That's the problem, Booker." Tiffany stepped up, her arms crossed over her chest. "We've been looking through the desk. We know Esther kept a safe. We know there's a life insurance policy, and Terrence is the beneficiary. We need the key." "The key?" I looked up at them. "Your mother died 3 days ago. We just walked out of her funeral, and you're asking for a key to a safe." "Don't be difficult, old man," Terrence snapped, his patience finally snapping like a dry twig. "We have bills, real bills, things you wouldn't understand. That house is falling apart, and we need to see what assets are left to cover the costs. Tiffany says we need to start the probate process tonight. Now give me the key." He reached for my jacket pocket, the one where I usually kept my keys. It was a violation so sudden and so cold, it made the air in the room feel like ice. I slapped his hand away with a speed that shocked both of us. The sound of the slap echoed off the linoleum walls. "Get your hands off me," I growled. Terrence's face turned a blotchy, ugly red. "You're losing it, Dad. You're getting senile. Maybe you shouldn't even be living in that house alone. Maybe we need to look into assisted living, somewhere they can watch you heimweh by." "You want me in a home so you can sell the dirt under my feet," I said, leaning on my cane as I stood up. "I may be 72, but I'm still 6'2", and I still have the shoulders of a man who moved crates for 40 years. I looked him dead in the eye. "There is no key for you today. Not today, and maybe not ever. Now get out of my sight before I forget you're my blood." Tiffany let out a huff of indignation. "We'll see about that. Come on, Terrence. He's clearly not in his right mind. We'll talk to the lawyer in the morning." They turned and marched out, the heels of Tiffany's shoes clicking like a ticking clock. I stood there in the empty fellowship hall, the smell of fried chicken and funeral flowers lingering in the air. I felt 1,000 years old. I felt like the world had moved on and left me behind in a place where sons robbed their fathers over their mothers' dead bodies. I reached into my pocket, but I didn't pull out the house keys. I pulled out my phone. It had been buzzing for the last 10 minutes, but I'd ignored it. I looked at the screen. 10 missed calls. One name, Alistair Thorne. I hit the callback button. He answered on the first ring. "Booker." Thorne's voice wasn't the commanding, polished baritone of a billionaire. It was jagged. It sounded like he'd been running. "Booker, thank God. Are you alone?" "I'm at the church, Alistair. I just finished the repast. What's going on?" "Listen to me very carefully," Thorne whispered. "I was going through the private safe Esther kept here at the estate. She gave me the combination years ago, in case of an emergency. Booker, I found something. A ledger, and a digital recording she made 2 weeks ago." My heart began to hammer against my ribs. "A recording about what?" "About Terrence, and that woman he's married to," Thorne said, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "Booker, you need to get to my estate right now. Do not go home. I repeat, do not go to your house. If Terrence finds out what's in this safe, your life is in danger. He didn't just wait for her to die, Booker. I think they helped her along." The room spun. I grabbed the edge of a folding table to keep from collapsing. "What are you saying, Alistair?" "I'm saying my head housekeeper was a lot smarter than your son realized," Thorne said, and she was terrified of him. "Get here now. I have someone here you need to meet. A private investigator Esther hired a month before she passed away." I hung up the phone. The grief that had been a heavy, dull weight in my chest suddenly sharpened into something else. It sharpened into the cold, surgical focus of a man who had seen the worst of humanity and survived it. I walked out of that church and climbed into my rusted Mutngin Chin Chum Chin Mui Ford pickup. I reached into the glove box, moving aside a stack of old napkins, and felt the cold, familiar weight of my service pistol. I didn't know it yet, but the man who walked into that church as a grieving widower was gone. The man who was driving toward the Thorne estate was a hunter, and my own son was the prey. I pulled out of the parking lot, but as I glanced in my rearview mirror, I saw a familiar silver Mercedes pull out from behind a line of bushes, its headlights off, trailing me at a distance that was just a little too perfect. Someone was following me, and I had a feeling it wasn't the police. The silver Mercedes stayed 2 cars back, hovering in my blind spot, like a shark waiting for a trail of blood. I knew that car. It was the success symbol Terrence had leased 6 months ago, the one he claimed was a perk for his new vice presidency, at a firm that didn't seem to have a physical address. Seeing it now, creeping behind me with its lights off, made my skin crawl. They weren't even trying to hide the malice anymore. In their eyes, I wasn't a father. I was a walking obstacle between them and a payout they hadn't earned. I didn't head straight for Highland Park. I've spent 40 years navigating the back alleys and warehouse districts of this city. I know every shortcut, every dead end, and every pothole that can swallow a low-profile tire. I took a sharp right into a crumbling industrial zone, the Ford's suspension groaning as I bounced over rusted railroad tracks. I watched the mirror. The Mercedes hesitated, then took the turn, its tires screeching. They were desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. I ducked behind a row of abandoned shipping containers, cut the engine, and turned off my lights. I waited, my hand resting on the hickory cane, my heart a steady, heavy beat. 10 seconds later, the silver Mercedes roared past, the engine whining as Terrence floored it, thinking I was racing for the main road. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I sat there in the dark for 5 minutes, the only sound the ticking of my cooling engine. I thought about the boy who used to sit in the middle seat of this very truck, eating ice cream and asking me how the stars stayed in the sky. Where did that boy go? How does a man raise a monster and not notice the scales growing? I backed out slowly and took the long way to the Thorne estate, weaving through the residential streets of the north side where the houses are hidden behind 10-foot brick walls and iron gates that look like they belong in a medieval fortress. When I finally reached the Thorne gates, the security camera hummed, recognizing my plate. The iron bars swung open silently, and I drove up the long, winding driveway lined with ancient oaks. The Thorne mansion was a palace of marble and glass, but tonight it looked like a tomb. Alistair was waiting for me in the foyer, his wheelchair positioned under a chandelier that cost more than my entire retirement fund. Beside him stood a man I'd never seen, tall, weathered, wearing a trench coat that had seen better days and eyes that looked like they'd seen everything twice. "Booker," Alistair said, his voice cracking. He reached out a trembling hand and gripped mine. "I am so sorry. I should have spoken up sooner. I should have told you what she was telling me." "Telling you what, Alistair?" I asked, looking at the stranger in the trench coat. "And who is this?" "This is Detective Vance," Thorne said. "He's private, but he's ex-police. Esther hired him 6 weeks ago. She told him she was afraid for her life." The world felt like it was tilting on its axis. My Esther, the woman who complained if the milk was a day past its expiration, was living in a spy novel while I sat in the living room watching the evening news. Vance stepped forward, pulling a thick manila envelope from his pocket. He didn't offer a handshake. He offered a reality check. "Mr. King," Vance said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Your wife was a brilliant woman. Most people saw a housekeeper. Mr. Thorne saw a financial advisor. But I saw a woman who was being hunted in her own home. We don't have much time, so I'm going to give it to you straight. Your son is in debt. Deep debt. Not the kind you pay off with a second mortgage. The kind you pay off with a funeral." We moved into Alistair's private study, a room lined with thousands of books and the scent of expensive tobacco. Thorne pushed a small, black leather ledger across the mahogany desk toward me. It was Esther's handwriting, neat and looping. I opened it, expecting to see grocery lists or church bake sale notes. Instead, I saw columns of numbers, 6-figure numbers. "She wasn't just my assistant, Booker," Alistair whispered. "She was my secret weapon. She had a gift for the market, an instinct for tech stocks that I've never seen in 50 years on Wall Street. I paid her commissions, big ones. Over 20 years, she built a portfolio worth nearly $4 million. She kept it in a private trust, away from your names, because she wanted it to be a surprise for your 45th anniversary. She wanted to take you to Paris. She wanted to buy you that cabin in the Smokies you always talked about." I looked at the ledger, the ink blurring as my eyes filled. She was scrubbing floors while holding millions. She was darning my socks while planning a life for us that I never dreamed possible. And she did it all in silence. A secret gift she was wrapping for me, one day at a time. But Terrence found out, Vance interrupted, his voice cold. He didn't find the money, but he found the trail. He started small. He forged her signature on a few checks. He borrowed $50,000 over a year to cover gambling losses. But 3 months ago, the losses got bigger. He got involved with some people in the city who don't take, "I'll have it next week" for an answer. Vance reached into his envelope and pulled out a series of photographs. They were grainy, taken from a distance with a long-range lens. They showed my house, my kitchen window. In the first photo, the timestamp said hi, muy bon AM. It showed Terrence standing at the kitchen counter, his face illuminated by the light of the open refrigerator. He was holding 2 orange prescription bottles. In the next photo, he was pouring the contents of one bottle into the other. "Esther had a heart condition, Booker," Alistair said, his voice thick with disgust. "She took beta blockers every morning. They keep the heart rate steady. What Terrence was putting in that bottle wasn't her medicine. It was a high-grade stimulant and amphetamine cocktail disguised as her pills. He wasn't trying to heal her. He was trying to trigger a cardiac event that looked like natural causes." The room went silent. I felt the ghost of 1,000 cold nights settle into my marrow. My son didn't just fail me. He had executed the woman who gave him life. He had watched her take those pills every morning with her coffee. He had kissed her cheek while her heart was being turned into a ticking time bomb. "Why didn't she tell me?" I choked out, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. "She was going to," Vance said. "That recording Mr. Thorne mentioned? She made it the night before she died. She was going to go to the police the next morning. She told me she couldn't believe it was him. She kept hoping she was wrong. She kept hoping her son wasn't a murderer." Vance pulled a small digital recorder from his pocket and pressed play. Esther's voice filled the room, soft, trembling, but filled with a heartbreaking resolve. "Booker, if you're hearing this, it means I was too late. I saw him tonight, honey. I saw Terrence in the kitchen. He thinks I'm sleeping, but I see everything. He's changing my medicine. My heart is racing so fast, Booker. I think he's trying to send me home early. I don't care about the money. I just want my son back. But that man in the kitchen, that isn't my son. He has Tiffany's eyes now, cold, greedy. If something happens to me, look in the floorboard, under the bed. I've left you the truth. Don't let them take the house, Booker. It's the only thing we have left." The recording cut off with a sharp click. I sat there, a 72-year-old man who had survived a war, and I wept. I wept for the woman who died alone in her own home, terrified of the man she'd raised. I wept for the life we should have had. But then, the tears stopped. And the soldier came back. "They think I'm senile," I said, wiping my face with a hand that was now steady as a rock. "They think I'm an easy mark. They're at the house right now, aren't they? Looking for that safe key." "They are," Vance said, "but they won't find it. The safe isn't in the house. It's here, in Mr. Thorne's vault. But they don't know that yet. They think you have it." "Good," I said, standing up. My knees didn't creak this time. "Let them keep thinking that. Alistair, I need you to call your lawyer. Not the corporate one, the mean one. The one who looks like a shark in a 3-piece suit." "Solomon Gold?" Thorne asked, a small, dark smile playing on his lips. "He's already on his way." "Good," I said. "And Vance, I need you to do something for me. I need you to find out exactly who Terrence owes money to. I want names, addresses, and amounts. If my son wants to play with fire, I'm going to make sure he burns the whole forest down." I walked toward the door, but before I could leave, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from an unknown number. I opened it. It was a photo of my living room. My favorite armchair had been flipped over. The cushions were ripped open. My wedding photo was lying on the floor. The glass shattered. Underneath the photo was a single sentence. "Tell us where the key is, old man, or the house isn't the only thing we're going to break tonight." I looked at Thorne and Vance. The rage was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating stillness. They wanted a war. They had no idea who they were fighting. I wasn't just a warehouse manager. I was a man with nothing left to lose, and in my world, that makes me the most dangerous person in the room. "I'm going home," I said. "Booker, you can't," Thorne said, reaching for his phone. "It's a trap." "I know," I replied, checking the magazine on my service pistol. "But they forgot one thing. I'm the one who built that house, and I know exactly where all the traps are hidden." I walked out to my truck, the night air biting at my skin. I didn't know it yet, but the next few hours would change everything. Because Terrence and Tiffany weren't just looking for money anymore. They were looking for a way out. and I was about to lock the door. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw the silver Mercedes again. It wasn't following me this time. It was parked across the street, waiting. And as I passed, the driver's side window rolled down just an inch. I saw the barrel of a gun. The barrel of the gun was a black eye staring at me through the gap in the Mercedes window, cold and unblinking. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. I could hear the wind whistling through the oak trees and the distant hum of a transformer on a power pole. My hand was already on the grip of my service pistol, my thumb flicking the safety off with a practiced click that had been etched into my muscle memory since Mutngin Chin Jumbay Muy Bon. I was a second away from putting a round through that window, a second away from ending this story in a spray of glass and blood. But then, the window rolled down further. "Dad, what the hell are you doing out here?" Terrence's voice was high, brittle, and vibrating with a frantic energy. The gun a sleek, compact chinum didn't disappear, but he lowered it slightly, resting it against the leather of the door panel. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown out, making him look like a man who hadn't slept in a week, or had spent the last few hours sniffing something he shouldn't have. I let go of my pistol, but I didn't take my hand out of my jacket. I let my shoulders slump. I let my jaw hang a little loose, playing the part of the confused old man who had wandered away from his keepers. "Terrence, is that you?" I asked, my voice thin and wavering. I got lost. I thought I saw your mother's car. I followed it all the way up here. These houses, they all look the same in the dark." I watched him through the dim light of the street lamps. Beside him, Tiffany was a shadow in the passenger seat, her silhouette stiff and predatory. I could feel her eyes on me, calculating, weighing the risk of me knowing too much against the need for whatever was in that safe. "Get in the truck, Dad," Terrence commanded, his voice dropping into a growl. "We've been looking for you for hours. We went back to the church, and you were gone. Do you have any idea how dangerous it is for you to be driving around like this? You almost got yourself shot." "I was just looking for Esther," I whimpered, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "I thought she was in the silver car." "Esther is gone, Booker." Tiffany's voice cut through the air from the passenger side, sharp and cold as a razor blade. "And if you keep wandering off, you're going to join her. Now, lead the way home. We're right behind you." I climbed back into my Ford, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't know it yet, but that encounter was the last time Terrence would ever speak to me as a son. From that moment on, I was just a target. As I drove back toward Elm Street, the Mercedes headlights glued to my tailgate, I realized that Thorne was right. The war wasn't coming. It was already inside the gates. When we pulled into the driveway of the yellow house on Elm Street, my stomach turned. The porch light was flickering, casting jagged shadows across the lawn. This was the house where I'd raised my family. This was where Esther had planted her prize-winning hydrangeas, and where we'd marked Terrence's height on the kitchen doorframe every year. Now, it felt like a crime scene waiting for the yellow tape. I stepped inside, and the air hit me like a physical blow. The house smelled of bleach, and something sour the scent of someone trying to scrub away the evidence of a life. Tiffany hadn't been idle. The living room was a disaster zone. My bookshelf had been cleared, the books thrown into a heap in the corner. The rug had been pulled back, exposing the floorboards. They weren't just looking for a key, they were looking for the safe itself, convinced it was hidden in the walls of the place they'd called home. "Sit down, Dad," Terrence said, pointing to my armchair. It was the only piece of furniture that hadn't been moved, but the fabric was stained where someone, likely Tiffany, had been sitting with a glass of red wine. I sat. I leaned my cane against the side of the chair and folded my hands, trying to look as small and harmless as possible. "Where is it, Booker?" Tiffany asked, stepping into the center of the room. She had kicked off her heels and was pacing in her stockings, her eyes darting around the ceiling. "The key. We checked the desk. We checked your dresser. We even checked the freezer." Esther wasn't the type to just leave things lying around. She had a system. "Where's the key to the safe?" "I don't know what safe you're talking about, honey," I said, looking at her with wide, watery eyes. Esther handled the papers. She said it was all taken care of. "Don't lie to us," Terrence roared, slamming his fist onto the coffee table. A glass vase one Esther had bought on our 30th anniversary shattered, sending shards of glass skittering across the hardwood. I didn't flinch. "I couldn't. We found the bank statements, Dad. We know she had a private account. We know about the trust. You're sitting on a fortune while I'm out here drowning." "Drowning in what, son?" I asked softly. Terrence's face twisted. For a second, I saw the boy he used to be, frightened, overwhelmed. But then the mask of the monster slid back into place. It doesn't matter. What matters is that money belongs to this family. It belongs to us. And you're going to give us that key, or we're going to start making things very uncomfortable for you. He's not going to talk yet, Terrence, Tiffany said, her voice dropping to a chillingly calm tone. She walked over to the kitchen and returned with a small plastic cup of water and 2 white pills. He's just overwhelmed. He needs his medication. He's been so forgetful lately, hasn't he? It's the grief. She held the pills out to me. My blood turned to ice. I knew exactly what those pills were. They were the same vitamins they'd been feeding Esther. The stimulants that had turned her heart into a ticking bomb. I already took my medicine today, I stammered, pulling back into the chair. No, you didn't, Booker, Tiffany said, leaning down so her face was inches from mine. She smelled of wine and expensive cigarettes. You're confused. Take them. It'll help you remember where the key is. I'm not taking them, I said, my voice gaining a bit of its old steel. Terrence stepped forward, his shadow looming over me. Take the pills, Dad. Don't make me do this the hard way. The tension in the room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. I was trapped in my own home, being force-fed the poison that killed my wife by the son I had loved. I looked at the pills, then at Terrence. This was the escalation Vance had warned me about. They were done waiting for me to die of old age. They were ready to speed up the process. Fine, I whispered. I reached out and took the pills, my hand shaking this time. It wasn't an act. I made a show of putting them in my mouth and taking a sip of the water. But as I tilted the cup back, I used the same trick I'd used in the service to avoid swallowing the local moonshine. I tucked the pills under my tongue, hiding them in the pocket of my cheek. I swallowed the water, making a loud, exaggerated gulping sound. There, I said, wiping my mouth. Are you happy now? Much better, Tiffany said, patting my cheek with a hand that felt like a snake's skin. Now, why don't you go lie down? We'll talk more in the morning. Maybe the medicine will help clear your head. Terrence grabbed my arm and hauled me up. He didn't lead me to my bedroom. He led me to the guest room, the one with the heavy deadbolt on the outside. He shoved me inside and slammed the door. I heard the click of the lock. I was a prisoner in my own home. I stood in the darkness of the guest room, listening to their footsteps retreating down the hall. I waited until I heard the muffled sound of their voices in the living room arguing about which creditors to pay first, and then I spat the pills into my palm. I walked over to the window and threw them into the bushes outside. I didn't have much time. I knew that the moment they realized I wasn't going to pass away in my sleep, the violence would escalate. I had to find what Esther had hidden. Look in the floorboard under the bed. The guest room bed was an old iron frame that Esther had insisted on keeping from her grandmother's house. I knelt on the floor, my knees popping, and began to crawl under the frame. The carpet was dusty, smelling of mothballs and history. I felt around the edge of the wall, my fingers searching for a seam, a loose board, anything. My heart skipped a beat when I felt it. A small, square section of the hardwood that didn't quite line up with the rest. I used the edge of my pocket knife to pry it up. Inside the small, hollow space was a metal box. It wasn't the safe, it was too small for that. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside was a burner phone, fully charged, and a thick stack of printed emails. I grabbed the phone and turned it on. There was only one contact in the list, Vance. But it was the emails that made my breath catch in my throat. They weren't from Esther. They were to Tiffany. The sender's name was Marco. I began to read, and as I did, the true depth of the betrayal started to unfold. Terrence wasn't the mastermind. He was the puppet. Tiffany had been communicating with this Marco for months, providing him with details about our house, our routine, and most importantly, Esther's health updates. One email, dated a week before Esther died, read, "The old lady is tougher than we thought. Increasing the dosage tonight. Make sure the old man is out of the house when it happens. We need the death certificate signed before the end of the month, or the debt is transferred to you." The debt wasn't just Terrence's. Tiffany had her own secrets. She had been playing both sides, pushing Terrence to kill his mother while promising Marco a cut of the inheritance to save her own skin. Suddenly, I heard the deadbolt on the door slide back. I scrambled to shove the box back into the hole, but I was too slow. The door swung open, and the light from the hallway flooded the room. Terrence was standing there, but he wasn't alone. He was holding his phone out, the speaker on. "I don't care about the old man anymore, Marco. Terrence was saying into the phone, his voice shaking. "He's not talking. We're doing it tonight. I'll make it look like a break-in." He looked down and saw me on the floor, the floorboard open, the metal box in my hand. The look on his face wasn't shock. It was a cold, murderous clarity. "I told you, Dad," Terrence whispered, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "You should have just given us the key." He reached into his waistband and pulled out the Chinam, but he didn't point it at me. He pointed it at the burner phone in my hand. "Who were you calling, Booker?" Before I could answer, a loud, heavy thud echoed from the front of the house. The sound of someone very big kicking in the front door. Tiffany's scream echoed down the hallway. "Terrence, they're here. Marco is here." Terrence froze, his eyes darting between me and the door. The hunter had just become the hunted, and I was caught in the middle of a crossfire I hadn't prepared for. "Get up," Terrence hissed, grabbing me by the collar. "You're going to be my shield." The grip Terrence had on my collar was tight, but his hands were shaking so violently I could feel his pulse thrumming through the fabric of my shirt. It was the frantic, erratic beat of a man who knew he had reached the end of his rope and was staring at the knot. My own heart was steady, a slow, deep rhythm, born of years in the warehouse and nights in the jungle. I let my body go limp, playing the part of the frail, terrified old man, even as my fingers drifted toward the heavy metal box I'd just pulled from the floorboards. I needed that box. It was my insurance policy, and Terrence was too blinded by panic to see it. The front door didn't just open. It exploded inward, the sound of splintering wood echoing through the hallway like a mortar blast. I heard Tiffany's scream cut off abruptly, replaced by a low, guttural grunt and the heavy thud of someone being shoved against the drywall. Then came the footsteps. They weren't hurried. They were heavy, deliberate, and terrifyingly calm. This wasn't a robbery. This was an audit. "Terrence," a voice boomed from the living room. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made the air in the guest room feel thin. "I know you're in here, kid. I can smell the sweat and the cheap cologne from the porch. Don't make me come looking for you. You know I hate playing hide and seek when someone owes me 500 large. Terrence squeezed my neck, his breathing coming in ragged, shallow gasps. "Stay quiet," he hissed in my ear, the barrel of the Chinam pressing into the soft skin just behind my ear. One word and we both go down. "You hear me?" I didn't answer. I just watched the door. I knew that voice. It was the same voice I'd heard on the speakerphone earlier. Marco, the man who didn't take excuses. The man who had turned my son into a murderer. I felt a wave of disgust wash over me, not for the monster in the living room, but for the one holding the gun to my head. My son was willing to use his own father as a human shield to protect himself from a debt he'd built on a foundation of lies and gambling. The door to the guest room didn't creak. It was kicked open with a violence that sent it bouncing off the wall. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite. Marco was shorter than I expected, but he was wide, dressed in a black tracksuit that looked out of place in our humble home. Behind him, two younger men stood like shadows, one of them holding Tiffany by the arm. Her face was a mask of pure terror, her makeup smeared, her eyes darting toward the window. "Look at this," Marco said, his eyes scanning the room, landing on Terrence and me. He didn't even look at the gun in Terrence's hand. He looked at it like it was a toy a child had brought to a knife fight. The family man, using the old man as a vest. That's a new low, even for you, Terry. "Stay back, Marco," Terrence yelled, his voice cracking, the gun wobbling in his hand. "I've got the money. I told you, my mother's trust it's millions. I just need the key. The old man knows where it is. I'll get it for you tonight, I swear." Marco stepped into the room, ignoring the weapon. He walked over to the dresser and picked up a small porcelain bird Esther had kept there for 20 years. He turned it over in his thick fingers, then dropped it. It shattered on the floor. I felt a sharp jab in my gut at the sound. That bird was a gift I'd given her for our 10th anniversary. To Marco, it was trash. To me, it was a piece of my soul. "You don't have the money, Terrence," Marco said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than a shout. "I've been talking to my people. The Thorne estate. They've locked everything down. There is no trust fund for you. There is no payday. You killed your mother for nothing." Terrence froze. His grip on me loosened just a fraction. "What?" "No," she said. The lawyer said. "The lawyer lied to you, kid," Marco said, taking another step forward. "Or maybe the old man here is smarter than he looks. Either way, The clock just ran out. I'm not leaving here without something of value. He looked at me then, really looked at me. For a second, our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of something in his gaze recognition. He didn't see a senile victim. He saw a man who was waiting. I didn't know it then, but Marco had been a soldier once too. Different army, different side, but the eyes don't lie. Tell you what, Marco said, turning back to Terence. I'll give you a choice. You give me the deed to this house, right now, and I'll give you 24 hours to disappear. Or, I take the old man with me. I bet Alistair Thorne would pay a pretty penny to get his favorite warehouse manager back in one piece. The betrayal happened so fast, I almost missed it. Terence didn't hesitate. He didn't look at me with regret. He didn't even blink. He shoved me forward, hard, sending me stumbling toward Marco's associates. Take him, Terence said, his voice cold and desperate. Take the house. Take him. Take whatever you want. Just let me and Tiffany go. He's the one who knows where the Thorne accounts are anyway. He's the one she really left everything to. I hit the floor, the heavy metal box sliding out from under my arm and skittering across the hardwood. One of Marco's men grabbed me by the back of my shirt and hauled me up. Tiffany let out a small, choked sob, but she didn't move toward me. She was already looking toward the door, calculating her own escape. Marco looked down at the metal box. He kicked it, the lid popping open to reveal the burner phone and the stack of emails. He picked up the phone, his brow furrowing as he saw the name on the contact list. Vance. Who's Vance? Marco asked, his eyes snapping back to me. I didn't answer. I just looked at my son. Terence was standing by the window, the chinham still in his hand, but he looked like a ghost. He had just sold his father to a mobster for a 24-hour head start. It was the final, absolute proof that there was nothing left of the boy I had raised. The rot Esther had written about had consumed everything. Answer the man, Booker, Terence hissed, trying to regain some semblance of control. Tell him who you were calling. I didn't call anyone, Terence, I said, my voice coming out low and steady. I was just waiting for the recording to finish. The room went deathly silent. Even Marco paused, the burner phone halfway to his ear. What recording? Terence asked, his eyes darting around the room. I reached into the pocket of my jacket, the one they hadn't bothered to check because they thought I was a harmless old man, and pulled out a small, high-end digital recorder. It was the one Vance had given me at the Thorne estate. I pressed the stop button, the red light blinking out like a dying ember. I've got it all, son, I said. The confession, the debt, the plan to kill me, Marco's voice, your voice, Tiffany's emails. It's all being uploaded to a secure server right now. If I don't check in with Vance in 10 minutes, the police, the DA, and the FBI get a very interesting bedtime story. Marco's face went pale. He wasn't a man who feared the law, but he feared the kind of attention a billionaire like Alistair Thorne could bring down on his head. He looked at Terence, then at me, and then he did the only thing a smart predator does when he realizes he's walked into a trap. He backed away. You're a piece of work, old man, Marco said, gesturing for his men to drop Tiffany. Terry, you're on your own. I don't do business with people who are already dead. We're gone. In 10 seconds, the room was empty of the thugs. I heard their car roar out of the driveway, leaving a vacuum of silence in their wake. I stood in the middle of the room, the digital recorder in my hand, watching the two people I had once called family. Tiffany didn't wait. She grabbed her purse from the hallway and ran out the front door without a word, her heels clicking on the pavement as she vanished into the night. She was a rat, and the ship was finally underwater. That left just me and Terence. He was still holding the chinham, but the barrel was drooping toward the floor. He looked at me, and for a second, the bravado was gone. He was just a small, broken man in an expensive suit. You won't call them, Terence whispered. You're my father. You wouldn't send your only son to prison. I looked around the room, at the shattered porcelain bird, at the ripped cushions, at the ghost of my wife that seemed to be standing in the corner, watching us both with tears in her eyes. I didn't feel like a father. I didn't even feel like a man. I felt like a judge. You're right, Terence, I said, walking toward him. I didn't fear the gun. I didn't fear him. I won't call the police. Not yet. He let out a breath of relief, a pathetic, wheezing sound. Thank God. Dad, I can explain everything. Tiffany, she pushed me. She said we were broke. I didn't want to hurt Mom, I swear. I don't want your lies, Terence, I interrupted, my voice as cold as the grave. "I want you to listen." Because I didn't know it yet, but the recording wasn't just for the police. It was for the people Marco works for. People who don't like it when their names are put on a server they can't reach. I saw the moment the true horror hit him. The realization that by recording Marco, I hadn't just trapped the mobster. I had made Terrence, the man responsible for the leak. In the world of men like Marco, being a snitch was a death sentence. And in their eyes, Terrence had brought a wire into their business. You killed me," Terrence whispered, his knees buckling. "You just killed me." "No, son," I said, turning my back on him and walking toward the door. "You killed yourself the day you switched those heart pills. I'm just making sure the paperwork is in order." I walked out of the room, but as I reached the hallway, I heard the sound of a window shattering in the back of the house. Someone was coming back, and they weren't here for the money. The sound of shattering glass in the kitchen was a sharp, final punctuation mark on the life I had built within these four walls. It came from the window above the sink, the one Esther used to keep open so she could hear the birds while she washed the dinner plates. Now, it was just an entry point for the consequences of my son's sins. I didn't move. I stood in the hallway, the digital recorder heavy in my hand, watching the color drain from Terrence's face until he looked like a wax figure melting under the heat of his own terror. "They're back," Terrence whispered, the chim trembling so hard in his hand that it tapped against his thigh. "Marco, he's not leaving us alive, Dad. You shouldn't have recorded him. You killed us both." "No, Terrence," I said, my voice sounding like dry leaves skittering across a grave. "I just stopped the clock. Whatever happens next is the debt you've been accruing for years. I'm just the one who finally called it in." Heavy boots thudded onto the linoleum of the kitchen floor. It wasn't the chaotic scramble of a robbery. It was the measured, rhythmic pace of a professional. Marco hadn't sent his thugs back for the money. He'd sent a cleaner to make sure the recording I'd mentioned never saw the light of day. In the world of men like Marco, witnesses are liabilities, and my son was the biggest liability of them all. I saw the shadow move across the dining room wall, a tall, lean figure carrying a suppressed pistol. The silhouette was efficient, predatory. I didn't have my service weapon on me. It was still in the truck, out in the driveway, light years away. All I had was my hickory cane and a house full of memories that were being desecrated one room at a time. "Hide," Terrence hissed, looking at the closet. He was already moving toward the guest room bed, trying to crawl under it like a frightened toddler. I looked at him, my only child, a man in his 30s, whimpering as he tried to squeeze his frame into the dust and shadows. The disgust I felt was a physical weight in my stomach. I had taught him how to stand tall, how to look a man in the eye, how to be a king, and here he was, a scavenger trying to hide under the furniture, while the consequences of his greed walked through the front door. "Get up, Terrence," I said, my voice low but commanding. "Stand up and face what you've done." "Shut up, old man. You want to get us killed?" He was sobbing now, a pathetic, wet sound that made me want to look away. The intruder stepped into the hallway. He was wearing a gray hoodie, the hood pulled low, and a pair of tactical gloves. He didn't say a word. He didn't offer an ultimatum. He just raised the suppressed pistol toward the guest room door. I didn't think. I reacted. I grabbed the heavy mahogany door and slammed it shut, sliding the deadbolt into place just as a soft thud sounded from the other side. 2 rounds buried themselves into the wood, splintering the finish. Terrence screamed, a high-pitched, feminine wail that seemed to bounce off the walls. "He's going to kill us. He's going to kill us." Terrence was hyperventilating, his eyes rolling back in his head. "Listen to me," I said, grabbing him by the shoulders and shaking him until his teeth rattled. "The recording was a bluff, Terrence. There is no server. There is no Vance on the other end of that phone. Not yet. I had to get Marco out of the house, but the man in the hallway, he doesn't know that. He's here to take that recorder, and he'll kill you to get it." Terrence stared at me, his mouth agape. "A bluff? You gambled our lives on a bluff?" "I gambled your life on the truth, Terrence. Now, if you want to see tomorrow, you do exactly what I say. Do you still have that gun?" He looked down at the chinum in his hand as if he'd forgotten it was there. Yeah, I have it." "Then use it. He's coming through that door in about 5 seconds. He's not going to kick it. He's going to use a crowbar or another round to the lock. When he does, you aim at the center of the door, and you don't stop pulling the trigger until it clicks." I saw the fear in his eyes battle with the instinct to survive. He was a coward, but even a cornered rat will bite. He raised the gun, his arms shaking, aiming at the splintered wood of the door. I stepped back into the corner, into the shadows where Esther used to keep the hamper. I gripped my cane, my knuckles white. I wasn't a soldier anymore, but I was still the master of this house. The door groaned. A heavy weight leaned against it, the wood screaming under the pressure. Then came the metallic scrape of a tool being jammed into the frame. "Now!" I yelled. Terrence closed his eyes and pulled the trigger. The room exploded with sound. In the confined space of the guest room, the muzzle blasts were blinding. Bang, 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 bang. He emptied the magazine, the brass casings clattering onto the hardwood floor like hail. Smoke filled the air, acrid and thick, smelling of sulfur and burnt dreams. When the clicking started, the sound of the firing pin hitting empty chambers, the silence that followed was deafening. Terrence stood there, his chest heaving, the gun smoking in his hand. He looked at the door. It was riddled with holes, sunlight from the hallway peeking through the jagged gaps. There was no sound from the other side. No groans, no falling bodies. Just the heavy, oppressive quiet of a house that had seen too much. "Did I get him?" Terrence whispered, his voice trembling. "Dad, did I get him?" I stepped forward and looked through one of the bullet holes. The hallway was empty. The intruder was gone. He hadn't been hit. He'd retreated. He was a professional, and professionals don't stay in a kill zone once the target starts shooting back. But he wasn't leaving. He was just repositioning. "No," I said, checking the deadbolt. "You missed everything but the wood, and now he knows you're out of ammo." Terrence looked at the empty gun, then at me. "I don't have another clip." I didn't think I'd need one. Tiffany has the other box in the car." "Tiffany is halfway to the county line by now, Terrence. You're on your own." "We both are." I walked over to the floorboard I'd opened earlier. I reached past the metal box, deeper into the crawl space Esther had built. My fingers brushed against something cold and heavy, a spare magazine I'd hidden there years ago, back when I thought the world was a more dangerous place than my own living room. I pulled it out and tossed it to him. "Load it," I commanded, "and this time, keep your eyes open." But as he reached for the magazine, a new sound began to filter through the house. It wasn't the sound of boots or breaking glass. It was a low, rhythmic tapping, tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the floorboards beneath us. My heart went cold. I knew that sound. It was the sound of the gas lines. This house was old, and the pipes ran right under the guest room. The intruder wasn't coming back through the door. He was going to burn us out. "He's in the basement," I whispered. Terrence looked at the floor as if he could see through the wood. "The basement? What's he doing?" "He's opening the valves, Terrence. He knows I won't leave the house without the recorder, and he knows you're too scared to run. He's going to turn this place into a tinder box and light a match from the driveway." The smell hit us, then the sharp, rotten egg scent of mercaptan, the additive they put in natural gas so you can smell the invisible death. It was flooding the room, rising through the vents, filling the house with a silent, explosive weight. "We have to get out," Terrence panicked, grabbing the door handle. "We have to go now." "Stop." I grabbed his arm. "The front door is a trap. He's waiting for us to run out so he can pick us off like ducks in a pond. He wants us to panic. He wants us to make a choice, burn or bleed." "Then what do we do?" Terrence was crying again, the tears streaming down his face. "Dad, please, I don't want to die like this." I looked at my son. I saw the greed, the betrayal, and the murder he had committed. I saw the man who had poisoned my Esther, and I realized that this was the moment. The escalation had reached its peak. The house was a bomb, the killer was at the door, and the only person who could save Terrence was the man he had tried to destroy. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the digital recorder. I held it up in the dim light. "You want to live, Terrence? You want to get out of here and start over?" "Yes, anything, please." "Then give me the confession," I said, my voice as cold as the steel in his hand. "Not the one I recorded earlier, not the one where you blame Tiffany or the debt. I want the truth. I want to hear you say what you did to your mother. Every detail, the pills, the timing, the way you watched her die. You say it into this recorder, right now, or I walk out that back window and leave you here to catch the spark." The gas was getting thicker now, making my eyes sting and my head swim. Terrence looked at the recorder, then at the floor where the gas was hissing through the cracks. He was trapped between the fire and the truth. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "You're my father." "I was your father," I said, stepping toward the window. Now I'm just a man with a recorder and a very short fuse. Clock is ticking, son. Speak or burn. Terrence looked at the door, then back at me. He opened his mouth, and for the first time in his life, the lies didn't come out. What happened next changed everything, but I didn't know yet that the most dangerous part of the night hadn't even begun. As the first word left his lips, I heard the faint click of a lighter from the other side of the wall. The click of that lighter sounded like a thunderclap in the graveyard silence of the guest room. I didn't know it yet, but that tiny spark was the fuse for the rest of my life. The smell of the gas was so thick now I could almost taste it, a metallic, rotten flavor that coated my tongue and burned the back of my throat. I looked at Terrence. He was a shell of a man, his eyes darting toward the floorboards, as if he could see the invisible cloud of death rising to meet us. He knew that the moment that spark met the air, we'd be nothing but a headline and a pile of ash. "Tell me," I whispered, leaning in so close I could see the sweat beads popping out on his forehead. "The lighter is clicking, Terrence. The professional is waiting. You want to go to your grave with her blood on your soul, or do you want a chance to run?" Terrence's jaw worked, a frantic, rhythmic grinding. He looked at the digital recorder in my hand like it was a holy relic. Then, the dam finally broke. The lies, the excuses, the Tiffany made me do it. Garbage, it all washed away, leaving only the raw, ugly truth. "I did it," he croaked, his voice barely audible over the hiss of the gas pipes. "I did it because she wouldn't listen. I told her I was in trouble, Dad. I told her Marco was going to kill me. She had millions. Millions just sitting there. And she told me I had to earn my way out. She was going to let them break my legs." He let out a jagged, hysterical sob. "I didn't want her to suffer. I switched the bottles on Tuesday morning. I waited until she made her coffee. I watched her take 2 of the stimulants instead of the beta blockers. I stayed in the kitchen, Dad. I watched her hands start to shake. I watched her clutch her chest and fall. My stomach did a slow, agonizing roll. I'd spent 45 years loving a woman who was murdered by a man I'd taught to tie his shoes. Hearing him say it, hearing the clinical, detached way he described her final moments, it didn't just break my heart. It turned the pieces into flint. "And then what?" I prompted, my voice as steady as a surgeon's. "I took the real pills," Terrence whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I flushed them. I called Chinchamuimort 10 minutes later. I wanted to make sure. I wanted to make sure it was too late. Tiffany said it was the only way. She said we deserved that money more than some charity or some warehouse pension." I clicked the save button on the recorder. The tiny red light went dark. At that exact moment, the tapping under the floorboards stopped. The house went unnaturally quiet. The gas was still hissing, but the intruder had stopped moving. He was waiting for the saturation point. He was waiting for the perfect moment to turn my home into a fireball. "I gave you what you wanted," Terrence hissed, grabbing my sleeve. "Now let's go. The back window, the basement, anywhere." "The back window is covered," I said, standing up. I felt a strange sense of calm, the kind you get when you realize you've already lost everything that matters. "The professional is standing by the corner of the garage. If we jump, he picks us off. If we stay, we burn." "Then what?" Terrence shrieked. I looked at the hickory cane in my hand. I'd carved it myself, reinforced the core with a steel rod for weight. I looked at the heavy metal box from the floorboards. I wasn't just a warehouse manager. I was a man who knew exactly how a building was put together, and more importantly, how to take one apart. "We're not going out the window," I said, "and we're not going out the door." I walked over to the guest room closet. I pushed aside the old winter coats and the boxes of Esther's sewing supplies. Behind a stack of blankets was a small, wooden hatch, the access point for the crawl space that led to the old coal chute. It was a relic from when the house was built in the 20s, a narrow, cramped tunnel that most people had forgotten existed. "Get in," I commanded. "It's too small. I'll get stuck." "Then stay here and catch the spark," I said, not looking back. I scrambled into the dark, dusty hole, the scent of earth and old coal replacing the suffocating smell of gas. Terrence, driven by the purest form of cowardice, squeezed in behind me. We crawled through the narrow space, the spiderwebs brushing against my face, the sound of our breathing loud in the confined tunnel. We reached the end of the chute, which led out into a thicket of overgrown shrubs behind the detached garage, the one place the intruder wouldn't be looking because it was too far from the main exits. We tumbled out into the wet grass, the night air hitting my lungs like a miracle. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I dragged Terrence behind the brick wall of the garage just as a soft, muffled whoomph echoed from the house. I didn't look, but I felt the heat. The gas had finally found a pilot light, or a spark. The guest room, the room we had just been standing in, didn't explode into a million pieces. It was a low-oxygen environment, so it was more of a flash fire, a heavy, rolling wave of orange flame that blew out the windows and sent a plume of black smoke into the midnight sky. "My house," I whispered. I watched the flames lick at the eaves, devouring the yellow paint, the white trim, the memories of 40 years. I saw the kitchen window shatter, the one where Esther used to watch the birds. I felt a piece of my soul char and turn to ash, along with the rafters. "We made it," Terrence panted, staring at the fire with a sick look of relief. "We're alive. Dad, give me the recorder. We have to go before the cops get here. We can tell them it was an accident. We can still make this work." He reached for my hand, his fingers greedy, his mind already spinning a new set of lies. He thought we were on the same team again. He thought the fire had cleansed the slate. I looked at him, and I didn't see a son. I saw a parasite. "You think I saved you for your sake, Terrence?" I asked. Before he could answer, the gray-hooded figure, the professional, stepped out from the shadows of the house. He was holding the suppressed pistol, his eyes fixed on the burning wreckage. He hadn't seen us yet. He was focused on the back door, waiting for 2 charred bodies to come stumbling out. I didn't hide. I didn't whisper. I stood up from behind the garage wall and raised my voice. "Hey!" I yelled. "Over here!" Terrence's eyes nearly popped out of his head. "What are you doing? He'll kill us." The intruder spun around, the pistol leveling toward the sound of my voice. But I wasn't the one he should have been worried about. As he turned, the headlights of 3 black SUVs roared up the alleyway, the high beams blinding him. The SUVs didn't have police markings. They were sleek, armored, and carried the quiet authority of extreme wealth. The doors slid open, and 4 men in tactical gear, real pros, not street thugs, stepped out with a precision that made the guy in the gray hoodie look like an amateur. "Drop the weapon," a voice commanded over a loudspeaker. It was a voice I knew. It was Vance. The professional looked at the fire, looked at the tactical team, and realized he was outgunned and outmaneuvered. He dropped the pistol and raised his hands. Within seconds, he was pinned to the gravel, zip-tied, and dragged toward the SUVs. Vance stepped into the light, his trench coat flapping in the wind. He looked at the burning house, then at me. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man whose plan had gone exactly as expected. "You're late," I said, leaning on my cane. "Traffic in this city is a nightmare, Booker," Vance replied, walking over to us. He looked at Terrence, who was still huddled on the ground, shaking like a leaf. "Is this the one?" "This is him," I said. I pulled the digital recorder from my pocket and handed it to Vance. He gave me everything. The pills, the timing, the motive. It's all on there. Terrence looked at me, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated betrayal. You set me up. You let the house burn. You let me confess just to hand me over to them." "I didn't let the house burn, Terrence," I said, watching the fire department sirens wail in the distance. "You set the fire the day you decided your mother was worth more dead than alive. I just made sure someone was watching when the smoke cleared." Vance grabbed Terrence by the arm and hauled him up. "Terrence King, you're coming with us. We have a very long night ahead of us, and a lot of people who want to hear that story you just told your father." "Wait," Terrence screamed as he was dragged toward the SUVs. "Dad, don't do this. I'm your son. I'm all you have left." I stood there in the driveway of my burning home, the heat from the flames warming my face, the smell of my life turning to smoke filling my lungs. I watched them shove him into the back of the SUV. I watched the taillights disappear into the night. I was 72 years old. My wife was gone. My house was a ruin. My son was a murderer heading for a cell. I had hit rock bottom, stripped of everything but the clothes on my back and the cane in my hand. I sat down on the curb, the flickering orange light of the fire casting long, jagged shadows across the street. I felt a coldness in my chest that no fire could touch. I had won, but it felt like the most devastating defeat of my life. But then, my burner phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a message from Alistair Thorne. "The assets have been moved, Booker. The trap is set for Tiffany. She just tried to access the trust from a hotel in Jersey. We have her. Now, the real work begins." Are you ready for the reversal? I looked at the message, then back at the fire. The grief was still there, but beneath it, something else was stirring. A cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just going to see them in prison. I was going to dismantle every single thing they had ever touched. I was going to take their greed and turn it into their cage. I stood up, my knees, not even creaking this time. I didn't know it yet, but the man who sat on this curb 5 minutes ago was the last of the victims. The man who was walking away from the fire was the architect of their destruction. I'm ready, I whispered into the night. But as I turned to walk away, I saw something in the ashes of the porch that made me freeze. It was a small, scorched metal box, the one Tiffany had been looking for, and it wasn't empty. I stood there, the heat from the embers of my life still prickling my skin, watching the firemen spray water onto the blackened skeleton of the house Esther and I had called home for 40 years. The fire was dying down, leaving behind a thick, suffocating fog of steam and smoke that tasted like charred memories. I looked down at the scorched metal box I'd pulled from the wreckage of the porch. It was hot, painfully so, but I didn't drop it. The metal was warped, the floral design Esther had once loved now bubbled and blackened. I didn't know it yet, but the contents of this box were about to flip the board on a game my son and his wife thought they had already won. Vance's tactical team was finishing up, throwing a zip-tied Terrence into the back of a black SUV. My son was still screaming, his voice muffled by the glass, calling out for a father he had tried to bury. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. Instead, I walked toward the back of my old Ford truck, sat on the tailgate, and used a crowbar from my toolbox to pry the lid of the box open. The hinge groaned, resisting, then snapped with a sharp metallic crack. Inside, protected by a fireproof lining I never knew Esther had installed, was a thick stack of documents and a small, leather-bound diary I hadn't seen in decades. On top of the stack was a Polaroid of me and Esther on our wedding day, a bit yellowed at the edges but perfectly preserved. Behind it was a letter addressed to me, her handwriting as steady and elegant as the woman herself. I began to read, and as the words filled my head, the world around me seemed to go silent. Esther hadn't just been an assistant to Alistair Thorne. She had been his silent partner in a series of high-stakes tech investments. She had built a fortune that dwarfed the millions Terrence was chasing. But the most devastating part wasn't the money. It was the revelation that Esther had known Tiffany was poisoning her for months. She had documented every dose, every vitamin Tiffany had forced on her, and every time Terrence had stood by and watched. "I'm leaving the breadcrumbs, Booker," the letter read, "because I need them to think they're winning. I need them to show their true faces so the law can never let them go. If you're reading this, the trap has sprung. Don't be sad for me, honey. I'm just finally resting. Now, make sure they pay the interest on the debt they owe us." I felt a coldness settle into my marrow that no house fire could ever warm. My wife had sacrificed her final months to ensure our son's greed would be his undoing. She hadn't just died. She had martyred herself to protect me from the monsters we had raised. "Mr. King," Vance's voice pulled me back. He was standing by the truck, his face unreadable. "We've got the lead on Tiffany. She's at a motel in Jersey, like Thorne said. She's got a burner phone, and she's trying to contact a lawyer who specializes in offshore trusts. She still thinks she's getting paid." I closed the box and looked at Vance. The old soldier in me, the one I'd tried to keep buried under warehouse invoices, was fully awake now. I wasn't just a widower. I was the hand of a dead woman's justice. "She's not getting a lawyer, Vance," I said, my voice sounding like gravel. "She's getting a visitor. Booker, the police are on their way to the motel. We should let them handle the arrest." "No," I said, sliding off the tailgate. I felt a strength in my legs I hadn't felt in years. "The police can have her when I'm done. Take me to the motel." The drive to New Jersey was a blur of neon lights and rainy asphalt. Vance drove in silence, respecting the storm that was brewing inside me. I sat in the passenger seat, gripping Esther's diary. Inside that diary was the final piece of the puzzle, the names of the men Terrence actually owed money to. It wasn't just Marco. Marco was the middleman. The real debt was to a group that Alistair Thorne had been tracking for years. When we pulled into the parking lot of the Sunset Inn, the air was damp and smelled of low tide. It was a miserable place, the kind of spot where people go when they run out of road. Vance pointed to a room on the second floor, the light peeking through the gaps in the cheap plastic curtains. "My guys are in the rooms on either side," Vance whispered. "She's not going anywhere. You sure you want to do this?" "I've never been surer of anything in my life." I walked up the stairs, my cane tapping a rhythmic, funereal beat on the concrete. I didn't knock. I used the keycard Vance had obtained and pushed the door open. Tiffany was sitting on the edge of the bed, her hair a mess, surrounded by printed bank statements and a half-empty bottle of cheap vodka. She looked up, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and a lingering, ugly arrogance. "Booker!" she gasped, clutching a folder to her chest. "How? How did you find me?" Terrence said the house. "The house is gone, Tiffany," I said, stepping into the room and closing the door. "And Terrence is in the back of an SUV, crying like the coward he is. He told me everything. Every pill you gave her. Every lie you told him." Tiffany's face went through a rapid-fire series of expressions: fear, calculation, and finally, a sneering defiance. She stood up, throwing the folder onto the bed. "So what? You think a judge is going to believe a senile old man and a recording made under duress? I have friends, Booker. I have documentation that shows Esther was losing her mind. I was just managing her care." "You were managing her murder," I said, walking toward her. I didn't stop until I was inches away. She tried to back up, but the bed caught her behind the knees. "But here's the thing you didn't calculate, Tiffany. Esther knew. She knew about the vitamins. She knew about the debt. And she knew about the man you were talking to in Jersey." Tiffany's bravado cracked. Her eyes darted to the burner phone on the nightstand. "What man?" "Marco's boss," I said. "The one you promised a 50% cut of the trust if he helped you dispose of the family. You weren't just betraying me, Tiffany. You were betraying Terrence. You were going to let Marco kill him so you could disappear with the rest of the money." I pulled a single sheet of paper from Esther's box and held it up. It was a screenshot of a message thread Esther had intercepted through the home's Wi-Fi. It was Tiffany, negotiating the price of my son's life. "You're a monster," I whispered. "I'm a survivor," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "I wasn't going to live in that dumpy house forever, waiting for you two to die of natural causes. I deserved a life. I earned it." "You earned a life, all right," I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I hit a button. "Alistair, you can send the transfer now." Tiffany frowned. "What transfer? The trust is locked." "The trust isn't locked, Tiffany," I said, a dark smile playing on my lips. "It was moved 3 hours ago. But I just authorized a transfer of $500,000 from your personal savings account, the one you thought was hidden, to Marco's boss, along with a little note, in your name, telling him that you're keeping the other $2 million for yourself and that you've been working as a confidential informant for the FBI to take him down." Tiffany's jaw dropped. She lunged for her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. I watched as the blood drained from her face. She saw the transaction. She saw the sent email she never wrote. "What have you done?" she breathed, her voice a ghost of a sound. "They'll kill me. They'll find me, and they'll kill me." "I didn't do anything but tell the truth in a way they'd understand," I said. "You wanted to play with the big dogs, Tiffany. You wanted to use their violence to solve your problems. Now, you're the problem they need to solve." I turned and walked toward the door. "Booker, wait," she screamed, falling to her knees. "You can't leave me like this. Call the police. Please. I'll confess. I'll tell them everything. Just don't let them find me." "The police will be here in 5 minutes," I said, my hand on the doorknob. "Vance is calling them now, but I hear Marco's associates are very fast drivers. It's a race, Tiffany. I wonder who wants you more." I walked out of the room, her screams following me down the hallway like a dying siren. I felt a grim, hollow satisfaction. It wasn't the high road, and it wasn't the kind of justice they teach in books. It was the kind of justice you learn in a warehouse when someone steals from the till. It was the kind of justice Esther had paved the way for. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, Vance was waiting. He looked at his watch. "The cops are turning into the parking lot now, and my guys spotted a black sedan circling the block. You timed that perfectly, Booker." "I've spent 40 years on a schedule, Vance," I said. "I know how to make things arrive on time." We got into the truck. As we pulled away, I saw the blue and red lights of the police cruisers flooding the motel parking lot. I also saw a black sedan with tinted windows parked across the street, its engine idling, its headlights dark. Tiffany was safe from the mob for now, but she was headed for a cell where she'd have the rest of her life to realize that she'd lost everything to a man she thought was too old to fight back. "What now?" Vance asked. "Now," I said, looking at the charred metal box on the seat beside me. "I go see my son one last time. I have a gift for him. I didn't know it yet, But the final reversal wasn't about the money or the prison time. It was about a single piece of paper that would ensure Terrence King never forgot the mother he murdered. "Vance," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Take me to the precinct. I want to be the one to tell him about the will." The reversal was almost complete. I had hit rock bottom, lost my home, and buried my wife. But as the sun began to peek over the horizon, I realized that I wasn't the one in the ruins. They were. The fluorescent lights of the precinct hummed with a low-frequency buzz that felt like it was drilling directly into my skull. It was a cold, sterile place, smelling of floor wax and the kind of burnt coffee that kept men awake through the darkest hours of the night. I walked down the hallway, the sound of my hickory cane striking the linoleum floor echoing like the steady beat of a drum. Every step felt heavier than the last, but my back was straight. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was the final witness to a tragedy I had spent a lifetime trying to prevent. I found Terrence in a small interrogation room, cuffed to a metal table. He looked small. In his expensive, smoke-damaged suit, he looked like a child playing dress-up in a world that had finally run out of patience for him. When the door opened, he lurched forward, his eyes bloodshot and frantic. "Dad, you're here. Tell them about the fire. Tell them Marco's men did it." He was vibrating with a manic energy, the kind of desperation that only hits a man when he realizes the walls aren't just closing in, they're made of lead. "We can fix this, Booker. Tiffany is gone. She's the one who started it all. I'll testify against her. We'll get the money from the trust. We'll rebuild the house. We can go back to how it was." I didn't sit down. I stood across from him, the scorched metal box resting on the table between us. I looked at the boy I had taught to fish, the boy whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, and the man who had watched his mother's heart explode for the price of a gambling debt. "It's never going back to how it was, Terrence," I said, my voice low and devoid of the tremor I'd used to fool him. "There is no trust for you. There is no house. And Tiffany? She's currently being processed in a cell 3 doors down. She's already signed a confession, Terrence. She traded your life for a chance to stay in the protective custody wing, away from the men I told about her debts." Terrence's face went a sickly shade of gray. "What? No, she wouldn't. We were a team. You were a pair of vultures picking at a heart that was still beating," I said. I reached into the box and pulled out a single piece of paper, the final will and testament Esther had drafted only weeks before she died. I slid it across the cold metal table. "I came to give you your inheritance. I wanted you to see exactly what your mother left for you." Terrence grabbed the paper with shaking hands, his eyes darting across the legal text. I watched his lips move as he read the words. "To my son Terrence, I leave the sum of $1. He let out a choked, hysterical laugh. $1? She left me $1? After everything? She was a millionaire, Booker. She had $3 million. "Read the next paragraph, Terrence," I said. "Read the part about the birthday." He looked back down, his brow furrowing. His eyes slowed as he hit the clause Esther had added at the very end. "However, should my son Terrence show himself to be a man of character, the trust was to be unlocked and transferred in full on his 35th birthday, provided I was still alive to witness his growth." Terrence froze. The paper fluttered from his fingers, drifting to the floor like a dead leaf. "Your 35th birthday is in 3 weeks, Terrence," I whispered. "If you had just loved her, if you had just waited 21 more days, you would have had it all. The millions, the house, the life you wanted. It was all yours. She was going to give it to you as a surprise. She just wanted to see if you'd stay by her side while she was sick." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. It was the sound of a man's soul collapsing under the weight of an irony so cruel it felt like a physical blow. Terrence slumped back in the chair, his mouth opening and closing, no sound coming out but a faint, pathetic wheeze. He hadn't just killed his mother. He had murdered his own future for a handful of silver he could have had for free if he'd just been a decent human being. "You killed her for nothing," I said, picking up my cane. "You traded a fortune for $1 and a life sentence." I turned my back on him. I didn't look back when he started to scream a raw, primal sound of regret that echoed through the precinct. I didn't look back when the guards rushed in to restrain him. I walked out of that building and into the cool, pre-dawn air, the city of my birth finally looking like a place I didn't recognize. A week later, the ruins of the house on Elm Street were cleared. I stood on the empty lot, the black soot of the fire finally washed away by a spring rain. I was 72 years old, and I was the wealthiest man I'd ever known, not because of the millions sitting in the Thorn accounts, but because I finally knew the truth. I didn't keep the money. I knew Esther wouldn't have wanted me to live in a mansion built on the blood of our family's betrayal. I kept enough for a small cabin in the Smokies, the one she'd written about in her letters. The rest, I used it to establish the Esther King Foundation. It's a group that provides legal and medical advocacy for seniors whose families have turned into predators. We've already taken down 4 cases just like mine. Every time a judge bangs a gavel on a greedy child, I feel Esther's hand on my shoulder. Tiffany is serving life without the possibility of parole. She's in a high-security facility, safe from the mob, but trapped in a cage of her own making. I heard she spends her days writing letters to lawyers who never write back. Terrence is in a psychiatric wing. They say he doesn't speak anymore. He just sits by the window, counting to 21 over and over again, waiting for a birthday that will never mean anything. I sat on a bench in the cemetery today, looking at the new headstone I'd placed for Esther. It's simple marble, etched with a single line. She saw the storm, and she taught me how to sail. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the single-dollar bill from the will. I folded it into a small paper bird, the kind Esther used to make for Terrence when he was a boy, and tucked it into the grass at the base of the stone. "The debt is paid, honey," I whispered. I stood up, my knees a little stiff, but my heart finally light. I walked toward my old Ford truck, the engine turning over with a familiar, reassuring rumble. I didn't know it yet, but the man who was driving toward the mountains wasn't alone. He was carrying 45 years of love, a soldier's honor, and the peace of a man who finally stood tall when the world tried to make him small. Greed is a fire that consumes the vessel it's kept in. It'll burn down a house, a family, and a life, leaving nothing but ash. But the truth? The truth is like the hickory of my cane. It's hard, it's heavy, and if you lean on it long enough, it'll carry you all the way home. I put the truck in gear and drove away, not looking at the empty lot on Elm Street. I was looking at the horizon, where the sun was finally breaking through the clouds, golden and bright, just the way Esther would have wanted it. The story of the Kings was over, but the story of Booker was just beginning.